All right, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for today's awards announcement and roundtable with some of our jurors from the 2021 AIA ADC Chapter Design Awards. We'll get started with the presentation after I cover a couple of quick housekeeping items. First, by participating in this webinar, you are granting your permission to be recorded and for the recording to be distributed as AIA ADC and the Washington Architectural Foundation may choose. Second, we'll have time for Q&A after the announcement. So please type any questions you have into the Q&A box and I'll relay those to our jurors after the announcements. So now I'm pleased to turn it over to our Design Excellence Committee's William Hendricks and Francesca Franchi to introduce our jurors. Thanks for joining us and let's get started.
Thank you, Katie. This is all very exciting. Yes, let's get started with the roundtable. I'm Francesca Franchi.
And I'm William Hendricks. We are part of the AIADC Design Excellence Committee. On behalf of that committee and the AIADC chapter, we would like to welcome our esteemed jurors and roundtable panelists. So let's begin with introductions. Catherine Chia is founding principal of Desai Chia Architecture in New York. She earned her master's degree from MIT and received her bachelor's of arts degree from Amherst College. Prior to founding her firm, she worked for Maya Lin on numerous art and architectural commissions. A registered architect in the state of New York and Connecticut, Catherine has also been a faculty member in the architecture department of Pearson's, the New School of Design, co-chair of Van Allen Institute's Program Leadership Council, and a trustee of the United Nations International School. She is currently a board member and treasurer of the AIA New York and the Center for Architecture. Welcome from New York, Catherine.
Joey Shimoda holds a Bachelor of Architecture degree from Cal Polytech in San Luis Obispo. In the early years of his career, he worked for Morphosis Architects and Frank Gehry and Associates, among others. On Valentine's Day 2000, he and Susan Chang founded Shimoda Design Group. The firm has ongoing projects in Brooklyn, in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. The firm, Joey is both a fellow of the American Institute of Architects and the International Interior Design Association. Less than 20 designers in the United States share the distinction of both fellow architect and interior designer. Great to see you again, Joey.
Pamela Hawks is a principal at Scattergood Design, Architecture, and Planning in Portland, Maine. She is a national leader in historic preservation and the integration of contemporary design within historic settings. She directed a wide variety of award-winning design projects and led multidisciplinary teams to create strategies for landmarks owned by the National Park Service, National Trust for Historic Preservation, and the General Services Administration, as well as nonprofit clients such as the Huntington Library, Art Collections and Botanical Gardens, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Pamela holds a BA from Williams College, a Master's of Science in Historic Preservation, and a Master's of Architecture from UC Berkeley. Thank you for joining us, Pamela.
Herman Howard is a founding partner and director of planning and urban design for Studio H, Planning Environments, also known as SHAPE in Atlanta. Unfortunately, he was not able to attend today. And then Siamak Hariri, founding partner of Hariri Contarini Architects, and a 130-person practice based in Toronto, also was one of the jurors and was not able to attend. And so thank you again for all the jurors for your valuable time and your dedication to design excellence. Now we turn over to the panelists to announce and discuss the winners.
For architecture, we have the AC Hotel by Marriott by WDG Architecture. The jury was really impressed by this project. One of the comments that came out was that This is a great interpretation of a DC facade, a really new take on that approach with a shingled approach to the glazing. On the inside, we were also very impressed by the elegance and restraint in terms of the interior design. The insertion of the courtyard was also a very nice way to bring more light into the rooms.
And I think just to add to some of Catherine's comments, I think one of the really nice things about this project was that the scale of the facade was very modern, but yet it had a real humane sensibility to it. It didn't feel like, you know, slick glass block. And the scalloping and the scale of the openings, the 2 floors, really was nice.
The National Museum of the United States Army, Skidmore, Owings, and Merrell. This project really impressed us. The jury was unanimous on seeing how this project was able to create a sense of lightness, a sense of beautiful reflection with the natural environment around it. The proportion of the buildings and the massing was very elegant, and the way it integrates the exhibition space on the inside was also just lovely. The combination of light, materials, color, all the themes were very thoughtful and very sort of beautifully crafted, but in a sort of modern way, really elevating what a museum can be.
And I think one of the really interesting things about this project is, you know, they talked about reflecting the core ideals of the Army, which was discipline, modesty, and rigorousness. And, you know, the envelope of this building really embodied those characteristics. There was an austerity that gave it a lot of dignity. And I really loved the way the materiality, because of its reflection, really showed color during the day. I mean, sometimes it could be very bright silver, and then at night it felt very warm, which is an unusual response you might get from an all stainless steel building.
Yeah, it is a very large building, but I think the fact that it does dematerialize at certain times of the day makes it a really interesting building, that it sort of has this dynamic quality to it, but with very simple forms, beautifully proportioned, and the use of light both inside and out and how that connects sky and land was quite dramatic. The next project is the Lubber Run Community Center by Vmdo Architects. This project brought up an interesting debate amongst the jury. Is it a building? Is it a landscape? It's actually both. And we really appreciated the fact that in section, this building is really beautiful and dynamic. It allows light and views to nature from the interior spaces. But as you walk around it, you have this experience of the undulating landscape married with the architecture. Beautifully proportioned, very inviting to the community, and you know, very kind of thoughtful use of materials. The spaces seem very inviting for those who will come and use the facility. It's generous enough to embrace the community, but it also has moments for the individual.
Yeah, I think the jury was really impressed with the way that this project addressed the sectional aspects of the topography. And then, you know, when you look at it a little bit deeper, you realize that they spent a lot of energy burying a parking lot, and that became the surface area for the activities, which I think is a really great way of doubling uses, and also maybe making it feel more like it's part of nature and not necessarily about the car, which I know we all struggle with in every design aspect. I also do really appreciate the attention that the interiors had, from the interior to the exterior. You know, the fact that we had a view where there was almost nothing in the ceiling, indirect lighting, no HVAC systems exposed. It's really a thoughtful approach to a building that's normally not treated that way. It's normally just, you know, lay in ceilings and the cheapest thing possible. So this one really stood above the others in terms of the way it treated its interiors and the scale of building.
And this building is also net zero. So that was another component that really impressed us.
The Folger Shakespeare Library Exterior Restoration by MTFA Design and Preservation was one that the jury used to acknowledge the importance of technical preservation, from non-destructive assessment that located rusting anchors to cleaning methods that minimize the use of water The project exemplifies design excellence through economy and resources. Sometimes, though not always, the mark of outstanding preservation project is the degree to which the hands of the current designers are invisible, which can sometimes make it difficult to appreciate. And so for this project, the jurors were really aided by the before and after photos, as well as these images describing the analysis and the implementation process. The result is really an enhancement of the impact and visibility of a civic landmark for another century.
Yeah, and for all of us, you know, this type of project really shows a labor of love, because it does really put the building first and the designer's ego second, which is, you know, it's an often overlooked and underappreciated aspect of our profession, which is, you know, building preservation. You know, in a lot of ways, projects like this has the highest use and highest demand of building science and documentation. So, you know, that level of attention and that speciality is something that's really important in the preservation of our buildings. I mean, I think it's great that, you know, we all had some political conversations about what buildings mean and what of their time and our time, because they're changing. But it's great to see that this building will last, you know, another 100 years.
Residences at St. Elizabeth's East Campus by Cunningham Quill architects won both a design award and also a citation for equitable communities. In the 19th century, innovative mental hospitals like St. Elizabeth's offered patients fresh air, sunlight, and access to nature, but often turned their back on the world. The residences at St. Elizabeth's reversed this historic paradigm, opening the 11-acre site by removing the perimeter wall, restoring the landscape, and enhancing rainwater capture. These forbidding brick entry pavilions were replaced with more transparent, accessible structures in similar footprints. And 5,000 original steel sash were retrofitted and restored to become more energy efficient. The former patient wards were converted into 252 rental apartments, and through strategic allocation of program elements, the design team opened up dark, narrow patient corridors to create communal breezeways and fitness rooms, residential lounges, and mailrooms. Through these connections within the walls and to the neighborhood, the design of St. Elizabeth's East creates community, enhances wellness. It's a reaffirmation of the building's original mission and significance, and one of the reasons why we awarded this particular citation.
And I think in terms of a reuse and reprogramming, this was an excellent example of seeing something, you know, in the past, it had a very, very heavy weight on what happened in this building. And it's great to see that this use will start to bring light and joy into the building. It's also a great, you know, that we saw that the adjacent properties are ripe to be developed and creating much more of a neighborhood and a community. So it's one step in a larger master plan, which is also really cool. The first award for interior architecture is Aspire Learning Center at Arlington Mill, Perkins and Will. You know, this was a project that had really most delightful use of color. The big takeaway, I think, for all of us was that this was a building where children may learn for the very first time what color and light do together. You know, what can happen when light comes through and projects on the floor. You know, in the past, this experience would be most pronounced in religious facilities, and you know, we're not always exposed to those now. So this is a great way of showing children how space can change and how that can affect, how the physical environment can make you feel something. The next one is Rockefeller Capital Management, LSM. Throughout all of the projects that we looked at, you know, there was a sense of what is appropriate for the client, what is the type of work that we provide for each of them, no matter what their businesses are. And this project is really an elegant and restrained example of that. It's clearly an understanding of what their client does, who they do it for. I know this project is also in Rockefeller Center, which if you've ever done a project in that building, you know, there's a tremendous amount of history and respect you have to pay for the building, but there's also not a lot of windows. So getting the building to feel like it's naturally lit is really, really an amazing thing to do. And I think this is a project that talks about editing, which I think is a strong characteristic that great designers have. And the next project is the Center Bridge at Seagram Building, also by LSM. When I first saw this building, it really reminded me of Paul Rudolph's house in Manhattan, in the way that it sort of had these ideas about light, and transparency, and reflectivity, but also with a sense of color. And this is also another very difficult project. It's in a very protected building, an east building, where you can't do a lot to certain parts of the area. But I thought it was great that it started to expose some of the actual architecture of the building. And it has a very romantic sense too, when you look at some of the photographs, that it was really respecting the spirit of the way that the building was created in that high modernism era. And I love that they used an artist to help create a main space that would cause you to think and feel like you're in an open area and not just in a very, very tight building. And in urban design and master planning, we have the Colombian Quarter Master Plan by Brendo Bell. This project, one of Herman's comments was he felt that this project was the most comprehensive in its sort of ability to be implemented and in the way that it can be phased and created over time. And I think the important thing to note here is that the phasing allows for first a creation of place, and then it allows for the addition of density. I think we did have questions in all of the master planning projects about scale, about streets, and about the appropriateness of the relationship of those two ideas. In this case, the respect to the landscape and the use of the metro station will really help this project become a more livable community.
This project really did address a lot of small scale as well as large scale details. So I thought that that was an important aspect of the way it was presented and the fact that we could see kind of the translation of the design strategies, down to small moments as well as the big moves.
We wanted to congratulate all our winners and thank the jury for their great work in selecting these winners. We would also like to start with some questions for the jury. Francesca and I like to initiate this because we had some interesting discussions as the jury closed last week. One of which is we discussed about the different categories, and I would like to perhaps ask which were your overall impressions of the entries this year by category? And I don't know if each of you wants to grab a category or we can all grab all the categories, but it'd be great to hear your just overall impressions of what you saw.
I can start. First, I think it was the amount of entries was really pretty impressive. And I think within the 4 categories that you had, I thought that they were, what I'm really happy to see is that interiors had a healthy number of submissions, because typically in the AIA chapters that I've seen before, that interiors are not encouraged to enter. And I think that we don't live in a world that separates those things anymore. And great design always combines them. So I think it's important to keep that encouragement up, to have that diversity. I also thought that in all of the projects, the landscape architecture aspect was also really, really strong. And I think this comes from, our awareness of more sustainable buildings and learning that we need to use all of the things around us to make our projects better. I think that the last thing I would say as an overall observation was that there weren't a lot of projects that had radical approaches to building systems or net zero or alternative construction techniques. So as a profession, for me, it brings up the question, who is the leader in that conversation? Is it the client, the architect, the building, or the government regulator? I believe that if the architect has to be at that leadership point, or else, you know, it doesn't really happen. And I know it's hard to get that to work together, but those were the things that I thought overall. In terms of, we had a lot of conversation too about the way you're asked to present the project with the 10 measures. And I know Catherine had some strong, I mean, she had some very clear insights into that. And maybe she can help us, you know, move into that conversation as well.
Yeah, I think, you know, the 10 criteria, I realize it's a lot of criteria for an architect or an architecture firm to have to manage in these kinds of awards programs. So, you know, one bit of feedback is, you know, to maybe in the future think about consolidating those 10 criteria into sort of 3 themes, and then, you know, architects applying can sort of think about how the themes fit and then shape their narrative accordingly. I did think that in terms of the way people presented their projects to us, it was very comprehensive. I really appreciated when a project had a diagram or an image of a construction shot or something related to process, because we weren't just looking at these projects for sort of the beautiful, final, pretty images. We were really trying to understand sort of the deeper aspects behind the project. What were the issues? What were, you know, some of the maybe even construction challenges? You know, what were the issues related to the community and the end user? So that kind of lead up in terms of sort of telling the story was very helpful in some of the projects where they had diagrams, they had process or construction shots, or they had like shots of specific construction details that were important to that project, or material relationships.
I think I can pick up on both what both Joey and Catherine said, and to say that I was first of all impressed with just the sheer number of projects and perhaps the square footage that they represented. And having lived in DC for a couple of years in the late 70s, I'm always amazed at how the city seems to has really transformed itself over 50 years. As a preservationist, I think I was also looking at what that represented. And as a preservationist and an environmentalist, and I did a quick tally. About 40% of the entries actually did deal with existing buildings, which I was really pleased with. And because I think it's pretty clear we cannot build our way to the climate that we want simply by building more new buildings. At the same time, I think as Catherine said, it's hard sometimes, particularly with renovations, whether they are in the new design or the preservation category, to understand what was done. Sometimes the best work, you can't see what's going on. And so having those diagrams, having more explanation, because frankly, the sheer volume of the projects made it very difficult to spend the time reading into the details when it wasn't presented to us in the portfolio itself.
Yeah, and if I could just maybe add a couple of things that, you know, when people think about, well, what would help me win, or what makes me stand out? And I think that, you know, in the DC area, it's a unique area because there's a lot of historical context, and many of the projects you're working with are either in an existing building, like Pamela said, or adjacent to historical areas or in a historical district. And so, you know, what we were looking for was really, what was the dialogue that was created by the insertion of the new to the old? And, you know, that I think that's a really important one, because once you start looking at many projects, you see that some of them, when you take the picture of the inside, there really could be anywhere, any place. And so we're always trying to find what makes it a vernacular, responsive element to the history that the envelope creates. And so I think that's an important thing that in DC particular, that you have that's different than any place else. Yeah.
To follow up on the conversation, which unique things did you learn from the shared discussions that you had? Which what personal learning you had from the experience?
For me, I always, it's nice to be able to participate with jurors from other places and see all their projects, because I often wonder, you know, is everybody else working so hard to make something good? And then you look at these entries, you go, oh my God, they're working harder than I am. And I thought that was pretty that, you know, it's a humbling aspect, but it also says that your work matters.
Yeah, I learned a lot through this process, both from the projects that were presented to us, as well as the discussion with the jury. So what I really appreciated about this jury is that everybody was coming from a place of design excellence, but with different areas of expertise. So for example, when Pamela was talking about historic preservation and conservation in the context of the current dialogue and also where it's going for the future, that was really eye-opening for me. And I really appreciated hearing it from her perspective and then looking at the projects and thinking through, you know, where are these projects going? What will they become? You know, what is the evolution of this part of our profession? So some of these broader issues that we talked about, you know, they definitely relate to the projects we looked at, but they also make me think more broadly about the context of where we are as a profession and what we hope to achieve going forward for the communities that we work in. Same with, you know, Joey's comment about connection to the environment. You know, what does it mean now to really design sustainably and to take these old buildings and retrofit them in a way that's maybe more responsible than ripping something down and building new? What does it mean to put up a facade these days? With everything going on in the world, do we think more about the operability of the facade versus just the facade as a filter, you know, a filter of light? So those were some really interesting issues. And then I think Siamak also made a really interesting point about his experience working in Canada, which is his home base. So in Canada, they're looking at sustainability and the cities have very strict regulations now. So as he was looking at American buildings, he was saying, well, what are you guys doing? And then he would tell us about what Canada's doing. And that was really helpful to get an international perspective. So I appreciate the fact that the jury was not just US-based architects, but also an architect coming from, you know, from another country to sort of look at us and say, hey, here's what I'm seeing. That was a really interesting discussion.
I think the wonderful thing about these award juries is the chance to use it to promote what we feel is important. And it was, I think, remarkable recognizing from all of our different perspectives, geographically and practice-wise, how much alignment there was. And I think that was very encouraging. And certainly also, I think while I reiterate that it was difficult to handle the wide number of issues within the AIA's Design Excellence framework, it was fantastic that all of the awardees were required to address that, because I think there's nothing like being reminded of that, and hopefully that in the awards that the clients who supported those strong ideals will also be recognized.
Katie, do you have, would you like to ask some of the questions from the audience?
Sure, yeah, we have quite a few rolling in. We have a couple of questions about your impressions on multifamily residential projects in DC. In the submissions, what impressed you or what you found to be lacking in those submissions?
Yeah, I think for me, we all struggle. I do a lot of corporate core and shell work, and I understand, and also a little bit of high-rise multifamily. And I think the hard part about those is really trying to understand if there's any innovation happening in that category, because it's also such a very narrow category in terms of what you can do and how you build things. And so a lot of what we saw looks similar to things in other cities. So going back to that idea of why it's in that community, what makes it special for being in DC, we didn't find a lot of strong links to that. But I'm not saying that the projects are not good. I think we were saying that we needed to find something extra to say this is an example of what you can do that'll stand out. I mean, I also will say in the single family area, you know, the most negative thing I could say is everybody should stop looking at Dwell magazine, because we saw so many boxes with Ipe panel siding, and I know we can do more than that, and you know, I think that's something we all could think about.
Great, thanks, Joey.
If I may add on to that, as we were closing our discussions, we were talking about affordable and equitable communities. Would you expand on the talk about multifamily in that context and your thoughts?
Well, our understanding was that last year that you had a lot more submissions for affordable housing. I don't think we had any legitimately solid affordable housing projects in the roster. There were some that were maybe market or market affordable, and so the hard questions about how do you do those projects, how do you and who's doing them, is the grappling problem every city has right now, because it's so expensive to build. And so how do you create communities that deserve this housing and with good design, yes, but also, be able to make it profitable for those who are creating it? And so that's a hard question. And we didn't see any projects that were solely posed with that context.
Of course, St. Elizabeth's was 80% affordable. And I think recognizing what goes into a kind of a transformation like that was also one of the reasons why it was particularly impressive. It's also, of course, it was also a project that was very different from the other ones that we saw, simply because it was a historic building. And I think, again, that argues for the wonderful value of working with something that already has a little bit of character. And I would just echo the comments before about, I think, if anything, with the preservation and restoration category, I would have loved to have seen was more projects that really challenged the existing buildings and used deep understanding of the existing buildings to create a 21st century understanding of them. And I know that that's tough in DC, where there are so many overlapping review agencies. But again, I think it's up to us as designers to make the case for the projects through our diagrams and through our explanations.
Thank you. Wonderful answer. Thank you. Katie?
Sure. We have a question that calls back to the discussions you had about preservation, specifically about the Folger Library. You celebrated the architect's restraint when operating in such a valuable historic context. If the library had had to accommodate additional space, would you have spoken about that self-effacement differently?
Absolutely. Well, that's a really tough, it's a theoretical question. And I'm always reminded whenever a politician is faced with that to say, well, show me the results. I mean, I was disappointed that we didn't have more. I would have loved to have seen a really terrific contemporary edition on a project like the Folger Library. I think that, again, we're not going to design our way out of the climate challenge without calling on all of us and our creativity to do that. I think that we recognized, and I appreciate Joey's advocacy for this, that too often the incredible technical challenges that are not visible are also really important. And I was really happy that we were, as a group, really unanimous about that.
And I think a key element about, it's really difficult to do old and new, especially when a building is protected or if it has, community significance or local significance. You're almost backed into a corner where you're never going to be successful. But I think the design principles we talked about hold true. What is the integrity of the building that you start with, and what is the integrity of the building you built, and then what is the conversation between the two? And if enough things click into place and the dialogue says these two buildings really complement each other, these things complement each other, then they stand out. If there's questions because of maybe photography angles or including too much photography or too little photography, those influence how we talk about the project and how we see the project.
A question that had to come. So how do you feel the past year, right, and all the challenges in the world have affected the approach for reviewing the projects? And do you think and look at design through different lenses now than in the past?
That's a really good point. One of the things that the jury talked about was that most of these projects were probably finished prior to the pandemic, or just maybe as the pandemic was ramping up, but they were still able to go in and get their photographs, thank goodness. So we were, basically trying to make sure that we weren't layering on maybe some judgments that are so specific to sort of pandemic use. And I think we did a really good job of just really looking at the quality of the architecture, the interior design, and historic preservation, regardless of pandemic or no pandemic. I do think that we're much more aware now of especially the indoor-outdoor connections and the fact that outdoor space is ever more valuable, given that that's the more healthy and safer environment to be in a pandemic situation. So we did look at, some of the projects like the community center and say, well, that, that's wonderful because, the community can basically be outside or be connected indoor, outdoor, and the ventilating aspects of that building are really powerful for a situation that we're in right now. I think the pandemic has changed our profession dramatically and changed how we work, our clients, how our clients need to be served. So I think we're all thinking through these issues in an ongoing way. It feels like there's no clear, perfect answer for everybody. The way that we have to practice is so nuanced in terms of helping people through this new way of working, new way of living, given what we're being faced with as a global health challenge. But I do feel that the projects that we looked at and awarded are ones that are resilient, through a pandemic. They're not so specific that now they're outmoded. I feel like they really addressed a lot of important challenges that we as architects face, and will continue to face as part of what we do.
Yeah, just to add to that, for me, the last year, because, we focus mostly in corporate commercial and interiors, and that's been frozen, for the most part. And the idea, Pamela's right, the reuse aspect of our profession will become paramount because the cost to build new buildings will just become prohibitive. And we're also going to have to rethink that, like what is the best building? And I know that as a profession, we're moving much more towards a reliance on building systems and building performance, which I think is fine, but we have to remember how to keep the beauty and that inspirational aspect to the profession, because otherwise we're just going to be building machines.
Okay.
Pamela,
sorry.
Oh no, well, I was just going to. I think my fellow jurists did such a great job. I was just going to say, I think it was hard not to look at all of these, thinking about social justice, and to try to acknowledge again through our awards that often the projects that do address these are the ones with the most modest budgets, and so the designers are really given the highest challenge of trying to make something that will read well from a design effort, but also make a big difference in the communities.
Sort of to expand on that, I know we had a little bit of discussion about this, certainly after the jury met and preparing for this. Each of you has academic background. What do you think the schools are doing to address the changes of this last year? And how do you think that's going to engage the architecture of the future?
That's an interesting question, because we have a couple interns that, we work with Cal Poly San Luis Obispo every year, and we take 1 or 2 for 6 months. They have a Los Angeles-based studio. And, I feel for anybody going to university right now, because they're not getting a actual physical experience of being there, but then to learn design through the process of being at home and getting critique and even for us to give assignments is a really different way of learning. I'm not sure, there are both pros and cons to that aspect, but I think the education system in general will change and what we think is important or not important. That's, I don't know, this also goes through all the conversations right now about the NCAA and how, sports college students should be paid for doing what they're doing. And so it sort of splinters our whole concept of what education at higher education level means. So that evolution will be, you know, really prominent in the next few years, I think.
I think I teach in the historic preservation program at the University of Pennsylvania School of Design. And I think that there are a number of, you know, there's so many things that have come up. We're all looking forward, certainly, to being on campus in class next fall, fingers crossed. But I think that for us, particularly in the world of preservation, the whole social justice movement has been really important. It's given us wonderful opportunities through new programs to connect with civil rights sites, other communities. And I was really delighted to see a number of projects in this year's award nominations that specifically addressed sites that are associated with Howard University and things like that. I think that also there's no question that I keep pushing this idea that preservation is really about the larger framework of design. And I'm really delighted to see that within certainly our core group of folks, a tremendous number of students who are coming in interested in preservation, but actually interested in preservation from a design focus. And I think that I hope that that means also that it will lead to much more connections. Too often, the two fields have been very, very separate. And my hope is that the two, both preservation and design, are no longer going to be on opposing sides, but in fact trying to tackle these issues together.
Yeah, and just to add, I think in terms of social justice and equity in our profession, I hope the schools are able to dig deeper into the pipeline, because I think one of the biggest challenges is, you know, one of the reasons we don't see more diversity in our profession is because those students coming out of high school are not necessarily choosing to go to architecture school. The ones that go to architecture school may not be getting the full mentoring support that they need to be able to then make it out as a professional and go for licensure, which is really important. So hopefully there's a partnering up. I mean, I feel like the AIA chapters around the country can play a big role in this, in terms of working with colleges, universities, but even local high schools to help them just, you know, serve as a resource, but also serve as a connector to mentors, local mentors that can help students see their way through from an early age through to licensure, because there are a lot of people that drop out along the way and a lot of people who don't even take the step in to the profession. So I think it's really important that we as professionals and the chapters around the country start to think really seriously about how to make sure there's a sustainable pathway for people.
So this is another question. What, if anything, did the jury have unanimous agreement on? What was the one thing?
You mean the one project or the one idea?
The one idea. The one idea.
Well, I guess for me, what's interesting is that the jury was sort of unanimous. This is my interpretation of it. My fellow jurors may slap me down and say that that's not true. But my sense was that we were unanimous on the fact that it wasn't just about one idea. The projects had to actually layer in and address multiple issues and have more complexity and nuance to them in order for them to be considered and rise to the, you know, to the higher level. So, you know, projects that had like one cool moment, but then it didn't really address a social condition, or it didn't address, you know, a programmatic condition, but it was just like a beautiful moment. Those projects tended to fall by the wayside. Whereas the ones that really knitted together different aspects between architecture, often architecture and interiors were sort of paired up as part of our discussion, even for the projects that were just in the architecture category or just in the interiors category or even in just the historic preservation category. We were looking for a more comprehensive approach that the architects took to achieve a beautiful and successful result.
Yeah, there were a lot of terrific projects submitted. And I think if anything, what we all came to agreement on was the importance of being both, you know, more than the sum of its parts. And I think that's good design. There was a remarkable consistency on the importance of that as a hallmark, and really encouraging, I think.
Yeah, I think one of the other jurors had he had a nice phrase, when we talked about each project, and he's like, well, what are we learning? What did we learn from this project? And I think we all agreed that that was an important aspect of what we would judge something by. So, understanding the context and all of those aspects really do, make a project stand out. It gets back to those 10 measures, all of the projects that won probably are pretty high in those 10 measures, even though they're not shouting them out to you,
Okay. Since we touched on the 10 measures, two-part question. What was your impression on how the 10 measures were integrated into design of these projects? And could you elaborate perhaps on how they are done in other chapters that you've been jury for?
Well, me personally, I find when you have those measures, they tend to be heavy-handed, and people tailor their submissions to try to solve for those problems. In California, the energy aspect has risen way far to the top in terms of an evaluation of a project, almost to the point where many people won't enter the projects because the requirements are too arduous. So I think as a profession and as an organization, we need to try to understand what the essence is of what we're trying to achieve through awards programs. And, maybe it means dividing them up so that you're not one size doesn't fit all. It's a complex question, but I feel like even as jurors to see projects and to make those assumptions is also really kind of difficult, projects that take 5 years and we're looking at them for a day. It makes things harder, I think. I think we need to figure out how to get to essence. And I think the essence does rise above. I think when you look at the design projects the project were selected, they hit on all cylinders. Yeah.
Right. I have a couple of questions from the audience. Would you say a few words about school design in the K-12 range outside of higher education? I know we had a lot of submissions on that, and there was some discussion during the day.
We actually spoke about, as a jury, discussed several projects that were K-12. The one that actually rose to the top, the Inspire project, captivated us from a number of different points of view. So I think we applaud all of the K through 12 projects, and we actually really wanted to see really strong quality K through 12 projects because we feel like that's an area that needs to be given credit and needs to be elevated in the eyes of the public as well as in the eyes of our profession. So the one that won really had some really unusual moves with light and color that we'd not seen before. So that one really stood out.
And I think with K through 12 education, it's really, I think architects, the world of specialization seems to keep ever expanding. But, the theories about how we learn, where we learn, what we're learning probably have not really been translated into the sphere of normal architectural practice. And so that behavioral aspect of design is not getting a chance to influence what the design looks like. So I think the other really heavy weight on all of these types of projects is that the budgets are usually incredibly challenged. And so you're trying to find a design element that's giving you something special, but you don't have a lot of money to do anything else. But I do think a change in that will be, how does the way we learn and the people who are experts in behavior and learning maybe start influencing how we make the spaces.
Great, thank you. We have another question about multifamily housing. Do you have any thoughts on micro units or units of this type and the associated trends in terms of modest living and density?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of micro unit designs everywhere. I'm in Los Angeles. In my community, downtown Los Angeles, there's actually a big push against micro units because first, there's not a lot of history on how they work. for normal people. I mean, from a university point of view or student living, that they make, you know, that's something we know. But from a young worker to a not so young worker, how do they live in those housing? There's not enough examples to really say what's good and bad in them. And so right now I see them as just ideas. I haven't seen a world that's validated that that idea really works.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In New York, I haven't quite followed the trend of micro housing to such a degree that I have expertise on it, but I do feel like of the few projects that I've seen or tracked, they're micro housing, but that doesn't mean that they're affordable housing or they're housing that makes it accessible to young professionals. They're actually quite expensive to live in. So as a result, I'm just not sure what solution or what issue they're really addressing. I think when one thinks about micro housing, one is hoping that it offers housing to more people who might not have access. But maybe that's a kind of misplaced criteria. But I think micro housing, still has to be proven in terms of what problems it's really solving. And also the notion of the community, does micro housing also offer a community experience that's more powerful than a different kind of housing model? And the micro housing that I've seen, it's not necessarily always giving you that extra community experience the way you might see in sort of Scandinavia, where they have tight housing quarters, but then there are these big community components as part of the housing that allows for a different kind of interactive experience to happen.
Do you have additional questions?
We have one that just came in. There's been historically some criticism of architecture in DC because the ubiquity of design review has tended to prevent big moves. Would you comment on whether or not you were able to notice that homogenizing effect?
Actually, having gone through the process of approval through the Fine Arts Commission in DC, I did not really see an overly heavy-handed result of that design review. But I don't know if we were actually aware of how many had any kind of specific demands placed on them. So it wasn't apparent to me. I don't know if it was apparent to Pamela or Catherine.
Well, I think I did note, I mean, we certainly saw that's the challenge. We see it everywhere, I think, not just in DC. And there were some comments as we discussed it about the challenge of design review everywhere. It's pretty rare now to find a community that doesn't have it in some degree or another. And I think the difficult thing that I see certainly is that particularly in work that's often funded by developers, they're anxious to have things happen as quickly as possible, to have as smooth a process to approval as they can. And it tends to make folks shy away from things that might take a little bit more work. And I think that is really disappointing. I think it's disappointing that the design review groups aren't more able to look broadly. And I also think it's up to, at the same time, I think it's up to us as designers to be able to present design that is not homogenized in any way and is not a kind of random assortment of materials and scales, which tends to be the other response, but has great integrity and great design ideas, and also fits the context and the requirements. And so I would hope that that is something that can be worked on in the future, certainly.
Are there any other questions from the audience?
Nope, it looks like that wraps us up.
Well, this has been a wonderful experience. On behalf of the chapter, we want to thank our wonderful jury and to all of you who attended today's presentation. And we want to say a big congratulations to all the winners, very well deserved. If you want to learn more about the winning projects, they will be posted soon on the AIA DC website, and they will be featured in the upcoming issue of Architecture DC magazine. Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you, and a big round of applause to all of our winners. And thank you to our jury. Everyone have a great day.